I can't bring you to Christmas. My ex is coming, and it'll be awkward. My Jeef told me, after I bought her parents thoughtful gifts and planned to propose. So I left. Months later, she's spiraling. But, back then, I stood in my living room amidst the glow of festive lights. On the table lay the evidence of my devotion, rare china for her mother, and a first edition firefighting history for her dad. I had mapped out our entire future, unaware she was already erasing it. The real weight wasn't on the table, though. It was hidden in my sock drawer inside a velvet box. A diamond engagement ring I had saved for all year. I checked the time, expecting excitement about the dinner reservations I made. Instead, the front door opened with a reluctant creak. Andrea walked in, shaking snow from her coat, but she didn't smile. She looked at the carefully wrapped presents and flinched. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, like the sharp pressure drop before a tornado touches down. She didn't even take off her boots. She sat on the edge of the sofa, creating a canyon of distance between us. "We need to talk," she whispered, refusing to meet my gaze. That was when she admitted the truth about Jensen. Her college ex-boyfriend was back in town, and apparently, my stability was suffocating her. She talked about how he made her feel spontaneous. Unlike reschedules. "Everything with us is so predetermined," she said, gesturing vaguely at the gifts. "Jensen just lives in the moment." I tried to argue, pointing out how happy she seemed when I planned our dates. She cut me off with a sigh that sounded pitying. "Honestly, Ben, I am doing you a favor." I stared at her, confused by the cruelty. Then she dropped the second bomb. "I saw the ring box in your drawer last week. I know you were planning to propose at dinner." My blood ran cold. She hadn't just stumbled upon this decision. She had violated my privacy, saw my commitment, and decided it was a trap. "Imagine how awkward it would be," she continued, her voice gaining a bizarre practical tone, "if you proposed in front of my family, and I had to say no. I am saving us both the humiliation." She acted like the hero of the story. Like shattering my heart 3 days before Christmas was a mercy killing. The woman I wanted to marry looked at me like I was a spreadsheet error she needed to delete. The warmth I felt for her evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I didn't scream or beg. I walked past her into the bedroom, grabbed my overnight bag, and threw in clothes, ignoring the trembling in my hands. I marched back out, grabbed my truck keys, and opened the door. "You made your choice," I said. She started to cry, but I knew it wasn't for me. It was relief. I stepped out into the biting December wind, leaving the ring and the girl behind in the house I paid for, though the gifts for her parents remained in my truck. The truck's heater blasted lukewarm air against my knuckles, but the chill sat deep in my chest. I drove aimlessly for 10 minutes, before remembering the back seat. The vintage china and the rare book sat there, expensive casualties of the breakup. I could have returned them, or thrown them in a dumpster. But that felt petty, and petty was Andrea's game, not mine. I turned the wheel sharply, tires crunching on the packed snow. I knew exactly where I had to go first. Her parents' house was dark, save for the twinkling icicle lights lining the porch. I didn't want a confrontation, so I moved like a ghost. I placed the heavy box of china and the wrapped book on the welcome mat, right beneath the festive wreath. I pulled a Sharpie from my pocket and scrawled a note on the wrapping paper. "You deserve a Merry Christmas, even if I won't be there." Walking away felt like amputating a limb, final and necessary. 20 minutes later, I was banging on Liam's door. He opened it wearing a headset and pajama pants, confused until he saw the look on my face. Dude, you look like you just watched a murder, he said, stepping aside. I walked into his apartment, which smelled of stale pizza and ozone. I dropped my bag and sank into his beanbag chair. Andrea dumped me, I said, the words tasting like ash. For Jensen. 3 days before Christmas. Silence followed. Liam didn't offer a hug or a cliché. He walked to the fridge, grabbed a soda, and cracked it open with violent force. Let me get this straight, he said, pacing the small room. Princess Spontaneous traded a guy who remembers her mom's china pattern for a dude who wears beanies in July. He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. She didn't dump you because you are boring, Ben. She dumped you because she's allergic to adulthood. You're the rent. Jensen is the vacation. I spent Christmas Eve staring at a loading screen, trying to drown my thoughts in digital gunfire. My phone had been face down on the coffee table for hours. When it finally buzzed, the vibration rattled the empty soda cans. I expected Andrea, ready to ignore it. Instead, the screen lit up with a text from Steve, her dad. Grace is crying. We saw the gifts on the porch. Ben, please pick up the phone. We need to talk right now. I took the call, on the balcony, watching the neighbor's inflatable Santa deflate in the wind. Steve's voice was thick with emotion. I don't know what got into that girl, he said, his anger palpable even over the line. Grace is in the kitchen holding those plates. We told Andrea she's making a massive mistake. It wasn't the reunion I wanted, but hearing them validate my sanity felt like oxygen. Jensen is a clown, Steve added. We miss you already, son. I hung up feeling lighter. The knot and rest of the loosening. I had done the right thing. But as I turned to go back inside, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Andrea. Thanks a lot for the stunt with my parents. The text read. Jensen feels really awkward now because you showed him up. You just couldn't let it go, could you? I stared at the screen and started laughing. She wasn't sad she lost me. She was mad. Christmas morning wasn't the logistical marathon I had planned. I woke up to the smell of Liam burning toast, instead of stressing over a roast dinner. We spent the day in sweatpants, destroying digital zombies and eating frozen appetizers. It was quiet. For the first time in months, my shoulders finally dropped. I realized I wasn't missing the chaos of Andrea's constant indecision. I was just missing the idea of her. The silence in the apartment wasn't lonely. It was actually peaceful. The week between Christmas and New Year's is usually a blur, but this one felt sharp. I stayed off social media, refusing to look at the train wreck. Liam, however, had no such scruples. He monitored the situation like a hawk. Intel report? He announced 3 days later, tossing his phone onto the couch cushion. Your replacement is already bored. Apparently, the spontaneous magic was wearing off. The Instagram stories had stopped. Silence in her world usually meant trouble in paradise. The bomb dropped on the 2nd of January. I was packing my bag to head back to my own house when Liam read the update aloud. Jensen had flown back to Chicago that morning. Alone. There was no romantic move, no grand adventure for Andrea. He had treated his hometown visit like a holiday fling and left when the decorations came down. Andrea had blown up her stable life for a 2-week rental. The sheer waste of it made me nauseous. I was back in my own kitchen, scrubbing a coffee mug, when my phone rang at 11:30 p.m. Her name flashed on the screen like a warning light. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but curiosity is a dangerous drug. I answered without speaking. The silence on her end was wet and ragged. Ben. She choked out. She sounded small, stripped of the arrogance she wore during the breakup. He left. He just packed up and left me here. I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge until my knuckles turned white. I heard, I said, my voice flat. He said he didn't want anything serious. She sobbed, the injustice thick in her voice. After I told him everything, I gave up. He just laughed and said we were just having fun. She wanted me to be angry for her. She wanted the protector she had fired. But the tank was empty. I felt nothing but a distant, cold pity. Then came the pivot I expected. I made a huge mistake, Ben. She sniffled, her voice dropping to that intimate register she used to get her way. I was just scared. The planning the ring, it terrified me. But being without you is worse. Can we just talk? Slept. I can come over right now. She actually thought I was a shelf she could pull a book off of whenever she was bored. She thought the boring guy would be grateful she returned. You are not scared of the future. I cut in, my grip tightening on the phone. You are just scared of being alone. She started to stammer a defense, launching into a rehearsed speech about soulmates. I didn't let her finish. I pulled the phone away from my ear, tapped the red icon, and then opened the settings. I blocked the number mid-sentence. The kitchen was silent again. This time, I finally felt like the architect of my own life. The silence in my house needed filling, but not with another person. I bought a rested Harley Sportster that looked like it had been dragged through a swamp. My weekends transformed from waiting for texts to scrubbing carburetors. The smell of degreaser became my new cologne. Liam came over on Saturdays to hand me wrenches. Every bolt I tightened felt like I was securing a loose part of my psyche. The bike required patience. Andrea hated plans. But this machine needed them to survive. My obsession with order, the very thing that got me dumped, suddenly became currency at work. I took over a failing logistics project that was bleeding money. I applied the same structure to the timeline that I had to my engagement. 2 months later, the project wasn't just saved, it was under budget. My boss called me into his office, shaking his head. You have a gift for seeing the chaos before it happens. He offered me a promotion on the spot. With the raise came extra cash, so I bought a camera. I started driving to state parks, waking up at 4 a.m. to catch sunrise. Photography was about timing and preparation, two things I excelled at. I stopped looking at my phone and started watching the light hit the trees. It was the first time in years I didn't feel the need to rush home for approval. I was alone in the woods, but I finally didn't feel lonely. While I was climbing, Andrea was digging a hole. I kept her blocked. But Liam lacked the willpower to look away. He treated her Instagram like a reality show he loved to hate. She's posting quotes about missing the good ones again. He told me over burgers. She had pivoted from party girl aesthetics to a sad, grayscale vibe. It was a performance. She wasn't actually reflecting on her actions. She was fishing for sympathy from strangers, because her real life was completely empty. Seeing her flounder while I thrived forced a shift in my brain. I always believed my need for stability was a defect. I thought I was the wet blanket smothering the fire. But fire without a fireplace just burns the house down. That's what Andrea was, uncontained heat. I realized my planning wasn't a cage, it was a foundation. I wasn't boring for wanting to know where I was going. I was just prepared. The shame I carried finally evaporated in the summer heat. The Sportster was finally finished by July. I took it on a long ride through the countryside, the engine roaring beneath me. I stopped at a diner for coffee, the kind of place Andrea would have hated. I sat at the counter, watching a couple argue over a map in the corner. The guy looked stressed, the girl annoyed. I didn't envy them. I drank my coffee black and realized I didn't miss having a partner. I missed having a partner who actually cared. That weekend, I expanded my circle beyond Liam and the garage. I signed up for a hiking group tackling tough trails in Hocking Hills. I wasn't looking for romance. I was just looking for fresh air. I packed my bag the night before, organizing water, first aid kit, and trail mix. Old habits die hard. As I laced up my boots at the trailhead, I didn't know I was walking toward the future. I was just happy to be walking on my own. The hiking trail was steep, a rugged path covered in loose shale and roots that twisted like snakes. Half the group was struggling, panting in the thick humidity. I was fine, mostly because I had packed extra water and electrolyte tablets. A woman near the front stumbled, looking flushed and dizzy. I stepped up immediately, handing her a spare bottle from my pack. "You look like you need this," I said. She took it, drinking greedily before looking up with sharp, intelligent eyes. "I am Celeste," she said as we reached the summit. She didn't have Andrea's frantic energy or the desperate need to be the center of attention. She stood solidly on the ground, taking in the view with quiet appreciation. We talked for the entire descent. She was an architect, which explained her appreciation for structure. "I like things to have a foundation," she told me, adjusting her boots. "People think spontaneity is romantic, but I think reliability is sexy." I nearly tripped over a root. Asking her out felt like disarming a bomb. The trauma of being called boring still rattled in my skull. I wanted to just say, "Let's hang out," to keep it casual. But that wasn't me. I took a breath and leaned into my nature. I planned a 3-stop evening involving a jazz lounge, a specific tapas bar, and a walk by the river timed for sunset. I texted her the itinerary, my thumb hovering over the send button, terrified she would find it suffocating. She didn't run away. When I picked her up, she was beaming. "I love that I didn't have to decide a single thing tonight," she said, buckling her seatbelt. Throughout dinner, she asked about my work and my bike restoration. She didn't glaze over when I talked about logistics or engine timing. She leaned in. "It must be nice," she said, sipping her wine, "knowing that if something breaks, you have the patience to fix it. Most guys just throw things away." By October, Celeste was a permanent fixture in my life. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, it was a steady build, brick by brick. We went grocery shopping together, and she laughed when I pulled out a categorized list. "Oh, thank God," she said, grabbing a cart. I always forget the milk without one. There was no walking on eggshells. I didn't have to shrink myself to fit her comfort zone. We fit together like gears in a well-oiled machine, generating power without friction. The real test came with the holidays. November rolled around, and the old anxiety flared up. I hesitated to bring up Thanksgiving plans, fearing a repeat of last year's disaster. Celeste beat me to it. She showed up with a color-coded calendar. "Okay, my parents want us for dinner, but we need to coordinate travel time so we don't hit traffic," she said. I stared at the calendar like it was a masterpiece. "Marry me," I joked, though I was only half kidding. We were lying on the couch, looking at Christmas tree options on her tablet, when the bubble burst. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a notification from Instagram. New follower request. The username was vague, something like user8922, with no profile picture. I ignored it, but then a message popped up. "She doesn't look like your type. Settling looks boring on you." The blood drained from my face. Andrea wasn't just watching anymore, she was hunting. December brought wet, heavy snow, But inside Jake's house, the air smelled of cinnamon whiskey. I held Celeste's hand, feeling the calluses on my palm catch against her smooth skin. We navigated the crowded living room, a unit of calm amidst the noise. Last year, I had been a nervous wreck checking my watch constantly. Tonight, I felt grounded. Celeste squeezed my fingers, pointing out an ugly ornament, her laugh vibrating against my shoulder. I felt invincible, completely unaware that the ambush was waiting for us near the kitchen island. I saw the red dress first, a flash of crimson that didn't belong in my new life. Andrea stood by the punch bowl, looking frantic and strangely smaller than I remembered. She tapped her phone screen with aggressive, staccato movements, eyes darting around the room like a trapped bird. My stomach tightened, not with love, but with the dread of seeing a car crash about to happen. She looked up, locked eyes with me, and her face shifted from panic to a terrifying, practiced mask of sweetness. She started walking. She intercepted us before we could reach the back door. "Ben, I didn't know you'd be here," she lied, her voice pitched an octave too high. She stepped into my personal space, creating a physical wall between me and Celeste. Her perfume was overpowering, a scent I once associated with comfort, but now smelled like desperation. She didn't even glance at the woman standing next to me. It was a power move, a deliberate attempt to erase my present by overwhelming me with our past. The air turned toxic. I didn't step back, I stepped sideways, bringing Celeste into the circle. "Hello, Andrea," I said, my voice steady. "This is Celeste, my girlfriend." Andrea finally looked at her. But it wasn't a greeting, it was a cold inspection. Her eyes raked over Celeste's simple blue dress with open disdain. "Right. The hiking friend," Andrea said, making the word sound like a slur. "I've been thinking about us, Ben. Don't you miss having someone who truly understands your history?" She was rewriting reality in real time, ignoring the woman holding my hand. Celeste smiled, but it was the sharp, dangerous smile of a woman protecting her territory. "It's nice to meet you," she said, extending a hand that Andrea pointedly ignored. "Ben has told me very little about you, mostly just that you hate planning." The jab was surgical. Andrea's face flushed a deep red. "Excuse me," she snapped, turning her back on Celeste to focus entirely on me. "Can we talk privately? I can't believe you are parading this rebound around just to make me jealous. It is beneath you." The word, rebound, hung in the air like smoke. The music seemed to dip, and people nearby stopped their conversations to watch. Andrea mistook my silence for hesitation. "I know you are hurting," she whispered, leaning in with manic intensity. "You are trying to replace what we had with some random girl who doesn't know you. She is just a placeholder, Ben. A boring, safe placeholder." She reached out to touch my arm, her fingers grazing my sleeve. That unwanted touch was the spark that finally detonated my patience. I caught her wrist before she could make solid contact, removing her hand from my person. I looked at Celeste, who stood calm and regal, unbothered by the chaos. Then I looked at Andrea, trembling in her red dress, fueled by ego and wine. The comparison was laughable. I wasn't torn between two choices, I was looking at a treasure and a piece of trash. I laced my fingers through Celeste's, lifting our joined hands for Andrea to see. The gesture was a shield and a weapon. "You need to listen carefully," I said, my voice carrying over the crowd. "Celeste isn't a rebound. She's the upgrade." Andrea recoiled as if I had slapped her. "I didn't lose you, Andrea. I escaped you. I escaped the chaos, the selfishness, and the constant need for validation." I felt Celeste squeeze my hand, a silent anchor. "I am not trying to make you jealous," I am trying to enjoy a holiday party with the woman I actually love. You need to let go. Andrea's composure shattered like cheap glass. Her face contorted, twisting into something unrecognizable and ugly. You are lying, she screamed, the sound tearing through the room and killing the music entirely. You promised to marry me? You can't just walk away. She lunged forward, grabbing at my lapels, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't sadness. It was the rage of a child who had been told. For the first time, the room went dead silent, every eye fixed on her meltdown. Before I could push her back, two of her friends, Jessica and Madison, who had been watching in horror, rushed in from the sidelines. They grabbed Andrea by the arms, their faces burning with second-hand embarrassment. Stop it. You are making a scene, Jessica hissed, dragging the screaming woman toward the door. I wrapped my arm around Celeste's waist, pulling her close. Let's go, I murmured. We walked out into the cold night air, leaving the wreckage behind us. The silence outside was beautiful, and for the first time, the past stayed dead. Or so I thought. The quiet of January was a deceptive lie. It started with white roses on my windshield, accompanied by notes reminiscing about a past I had buried. Then she appeared at my office. I watched from my office window as she stood by my truck like a sentinel in the freezing rain. My coworkers started whispering near the water cooler. Security had to escort her off the property twice in 1 week. She wasn't screaming anymore. She was just staring, which was infinitely worse. It felt like being hunted by a ghost. The war then moved online, targeting the one person I had sworn to protect. Celeste's notifications blew up with venomous comments from burner accounts with no profile pictures. He's just using you. Read one under a photo of us cooking dinner. Another claimed I was still sleeping with Andrea. Celeste was tough, but I saw the toll it took on her. She started checking the locks 3 times a night. Her sanctuary was being violated by invisible fingers. We stopped tagging locations. We stopped sharing our joy. I didn't want to involve the law, but she left me no choice. I sat in a cold waiting room, filling out forms that detailed the destruction of my privacy. The judge granted the temporary restraining order without hesitation, citing the workplace incidents. 500 feet. It felt like a magic circle drawn in salt, a flimsy barrier against madness. The sheriff served her the papers the next day. I hoped the legal wait would finally force her to stop. For 2 weeks, the silence was absolute, lulling us into a false sense of security. On a rainy Friday in late February, Liam came over for a Mario Kart tournament to break the tension. We were laughing, eating pepperoni pizza, and trash-talking Celeste's drift skills. The house felt warm and safe, a fortress against the cold downpour outside. Then, at exactly 11:43 p.m., the pounding started. It wasn't a knock. It was a rhythmic, heavy thudding against the front door that shook the frame and killed the mood. The laughter died instantly. Liam paused the game, his eyes going wide. Ben.
I know you are in there.
Andrea's voice was slurred, muffled by the wood but terrifyingly distinct. I just want to talk. Open the damn door. She sounded like a nightmare scratching to get in. Celeste curled her legs up on the sofa, her face turning pale. I stood up, my fist clenched at my sides. Every instinct screamed to open the door and yell. But that was the trap she had set for me. I reached for the handle, but Liam grabbed my shoulder hard. Don't, he whispered urgently. If you open that, she wins. She wants the drama. He pointed to the smart doorbell panel on the wall. He was right. Direct contact was her fuel. I stepped back and pressed the intercom button instead. The video feed flickered to life, showing Andrea soaked in rain, leaning heavily against the siding. She looked completely wrecked. "Go home, Andrea," I said, my voice mechanical. "You are violating a court order." "I am not leaving." She shrieked at the camera, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. "You can't hide behind a screen. We need to fix this." She kicked the door, a dull thud that vibrated through the floorboards. "Celeste is nothing. She doesn't love you like I do." She was violating the court order in real time, documenting her own crime for the world to see. I looked at Celeste. She wasn't scared anymore, she looked sad. "Call them," Celeste whispered. It was time. I dialed 911, one with steady hands. "I have an intruder violating a restraining order," I told the dispatcher, my voice calm. "She is intoxicated and refusing to leave." Stating the facts made it real. This wasn't a bad breakup anymore, it was a criminal record. Outside, Andrea had slumped against the door, sobbing loudly about our future. It was a tragic, pathetic sound. I felt a profound sense of grief, not for the relationship, but for the person she used to be before she broke. The blue lights swept across the living room, walls 4 minutes later. We watched a monitor in silence. 2 officers approached the porch, flashlights cutting through the rain. Andrea tried to stand, stumbling back against the railing. She started arguing, pointing at the house. But the officers weren't interested in her side of the story. They cuffed her quickly, efficient and dispassionate. Seeing her in handcuffs should have felt victorious. Instead, it just felt heavy. The finality of the moment was crushing, but absolutely necessary. As the cruiser pulled away, silence returned to the street. I exhaled, feeling the adrenaline crash. Liam looked up from his phone, his face grim but satisfied. "I recorded the audio," he said quietly. "Sent it to the group chat. Just so no one buys her victim's story tomorrow." It was brutal, but it was the only way to end the narrative. The siege was broken. I sat next to Celeste and pulled her close. The house was quiet, but this time, it was the silence of safety. The July sun filtered through the oak trees, dappling the white chairs arranged in perfect geometric rows. My clipboard was nowhere in sight, but I knew the timeline by heart. The ceremony had started exactly at 4, the music cueing precisely as the wind died down. It was the chaos I had always craved. Celeste stood across from me, her hand warm in mine, anchoring me to the earth. She didn't look like a prize I had won. She looked like the partner I had built a life with. The air smelled of jasmine and victory. Liam tapped the microphone, the feedback whine quickly silenced by the sound engineer. He grinned, raising his champagne glass, with dangerous intent. "We all know Ben loves a spreadsheet," he announced, earning a ripple of laughter from the guests. A certain someone once told him that planning made him suffocating, that he needed to be more spontaneous. He paused for effect, looking directly at me. "Well, looking at this open bar and these filet mignons, I think we can all agree that spontaneous is just a code word for eating pizza rolls in a basement." The reception tent erupted. Even Celeste's grandmother was chuckling into her napkin. A year ago, that joke would have stung like salt in a wound. I would have felt defensive, trying to prove I wasn't rigid. Now, I laughed harder than anyone. The shame that Andrea had planted in my chest was gone, weeded out by months of real love. My organizational skills weren't a defect to be fixed. They were the steel beams that held up this joy. I squeezed Celeste's hand under the table, and she squeezed back 3 times. Rumors had drifted back through the grapevine, filtered by Liam's relentless intelligence network. Andrea had moved to Portland 3 months after the arrest, fleeing the wreckage of her reputation. She was starting over in a city where no one knew her name or her criminal record. It didn't bring me pleasure to think about her running away again. It just felt like a distant news story about a storm in another country. She was a chaotic weather pattern that had finally blown out to sea, leaving clear skies behind for the rest of us. The DJ transitioned into our final song, a track we had selected 4 months ago. We moved to the center of the floor, not swaying aimlessly, but stepping into a practiced waltz. We had taken lessons for 6 weeks. Some people might call that excessive or unromantic to rehearse a moment meant to feel natural. But as I spun Celeste, her dress flaring out in a perfect white arc, I knew better. Preparation allowed us to be present. We weren't worrying about our feet. We were just looking at each other. We exited through a tunnel of sparklers, the light hissing and popping around us. The restored vintage car waited at the curb, its engine purring. I opened the door for my wife, checking my watch one last time. It was exactly 10 o'clock p.m. We were precisely on schedule, not a minute late or a minute early. I slid into the driver's seat and looked at Celeste. "Ready?" I asked. She smiled, buckling her seatbelt with a satisfying click. "Always," she said. I put the car in gear and drove toward the plan.